Ready? Me too. How you doing? I'm Vince. I'm with,
Alex,
and I'm Backyard Mangoes, and
Tropical Acres Farms.
this is Mr. Knowledgeable. So today we're going to talk a little briefly about, I think, roots and water, the development of mango trees, and how water plays an important role, and when to water them, how to water them, how frequently, and just look at taking care of those trees properly. So I'll let you start with something
Okay.
on the
Uh,
spot.
all right. Well, watering is a critical issue when it comes to growing fruit trees, and that includes mango trees, which we grow a lot of here. And it's a topic that we do get asked about a good bit by people that are trying to grow trees at home or when we sell trees to people. Um, so we do have an irrigation system here. And
So
really, it's like two irrigation systems because we have trees in pots that we water, and we have trees that are planted in the ground that we irrigate as well.
So for irrigation, like I hand water my trees, the young ones. Once they get massive, I don't worry about watering this.
Mm-hmm.
But so anything under around 3 to 4 years, I water just sort of more frequently or here and there. If it goes a couple weeks without rain, I'll water it. Uh, what about somebody who has a sprinkler system at their house and they're running that, say, 2 or 3 times a week?
When we say sprinkler system, are we talking about a lawn sprinkler
Yeah,
system?
because we're not
Lawn
talking
sprinklers are,
commercial.
yeah.
Most people aren't doing what we do. They have
Um,
one, two, three trees.
so I won't say that lawn sprinklers provide nothing, but because obviously it is some amount of water, but they're usually designed to irrigate shallow rooted grasses and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they may not put out the volume of water around the trees or trees that you're aiming to irrigate, right? So I'm not a big fan of relying on them for that purpose. I usually advise people that if you're going to water your tree, and you should, that you set up an individual sprinkler for that tree. So we're talking about an in-ground tree here, right?
Or a drip, or
Yeah. Now, if it's small trees in pots, like in the nursery setting, you can use overhead sprinklers. I mean, you can use overhead sprinklers to water in-ground trees too, but I don't advise it because it gets the leaves too wet, and that can cause an issue when you're talking about fruit production and quality and things of that sort.
yeah.
But some people have different opinions on irrigation, and some people will plant trees and basically never water them. And sometimes you can do that depending on your locale. Here in South Florida, you can plant mango trees in the wet part of the year, and a lot of times, a lot of years, they'll get enough water from the rain to actually establish themselves and grow and not require any supplemental irrigation, at least to stay healthy.
So
But there's different reasons for not relying on that.
yeah.
And generally speaking, if you're going to be planting a mango tree, it's a good idea to provide it with some supplemental irrigation if you are trying to get it to grow at the pace that you want it to get fruit sooner. Most people want their trees to fruit as quickly as possible. Well, in order to achieve that, you need some canopy structure,
Needed to
right?
grow.
You need it to grow. Even though in the long run, we're usually trying to inhibit their growth to some extent because we want to control their size, right? We don't want them getting massive. We'd like them to be manageable and kept at a certain size where it's easier to harvest them and all that good stuff. So later on,
I'll just interject. So me and another grower, we planted similar amount of trees at a similar amount of time. He had an irrigation system in, and he also had a good mulch system on that irrigation system.
Mhm.
And when I had went to his property and we were talking, the difference between his trees and my trees were noticeably different because I did a lot more we get rain all the time, but I relied a lot more on the rain, watered more sparingly, and but yeah, so his trees definitely were outgrowing mine. Looked very healthy, and then that's when I went home. I had a well. I already had the well there, but I hooked up the pump and then hooked up some irrigation, or I got water and mulching on them, and then my trees have kind of caught up, but they've really it made a huge difference on those young trees in that first, say, 3 year time
Yeah.
frame.
So when you plant young trees here in South Florida, there is a rainy period of time where they might be receiving enough water to encourage them to grow without supplemental irrigation. But we do have a defined dry season here in South Florida that lasts through our winter and spring. And we will go through pockets of our rainy season sometimes where there is very little rainfall at all.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to predict. So with young mango trees, recently planted trees, it is sensible to provide them with supplemental irrigation for usually the first couple of years of their lives. Mango trees typically grow pretty quickly here, okay? And there's exceptions with dwarf trees and so forth, but generally it doesn't take them very long to reach a size where they're beginning to bear fruit, physically ready to bear fruit.
What's the size you like for that? When you say physically ready to bear fruit, let's remind people what you kind of look for in size.
I look for a trunk that has a girth of a couple of inches, usually measured above a foot above the soil surface. And I look for a canopy that's hopefully in the range of 4 to 5 feet in width and height. So that tells you that the canopy is reasonably complex at that point, has enough foliage to support fruit production without it stunting the tree.
Okay.
Because stunting is undesirable. But fruit production on a good sized canopy will be beneficial to the tree because it will slow the rate of growth down without stunting it, right? So when a tree has reached that size, we have usually already stopped irrigating it regularly. And the reason is because by that point, its root system is reasonably established that it no longer requires that water to grow at the rate that you find acceptable, unless you are trying to make the tree very big.
Yeah.
In which case you would keep continuing to irrigate it routinely. So once the tree has reached fruit production size, the only time we'll usually water them is during the first 6 to 8 weeks of fruit development. So the trees flower, they've set their little mangoes, we'll usually start to water them at least a couple times a week to keep the surface roots from drying out, because this is our dry season when they're usually setting their fruit and developing their fruit. And the more dry it is, the more stress they feel and the more fruit they will drop. And so we're trying to encourage fruit retention.
And I feel like that's one of the things we don't talk about enough is also the roots and root structure of the trees. And you mentioned the surface roots of them, because how deep are, because we know they have the tap root, and that tap roots can get very deep, and we hit our aquifer down here, and that's why they can go a long period truly without watering.
Right.
But
so they still have surface roots that are, just only a couple inches or sometimes right up against the surface of the soil. And when the weather gets very dry here, that soil will dry out. And they will feel stress from that. You may not see it in the canopy, but believe me, they feel it. They know it's dry, and when they feel stress...
But pre-flowering, right? So
pre-flowering, that stress is desirable, right? In the tropics, that drought stress actually makes them bloom.
That's right.
Here, it's more like cold weather and dry weather, and more so cold weather. But that dry weather helps.
Any predictions for the weather this year? You've read the Farmer's Almanac?
No, I haven't read anything, but I can make a prediction if you want. It will be mild, warm, wet. All the things that you don't want, it will be here, because that is how it has been for 15 years here. And I'm just going to go with the trend, right? Compared to the historical average, it will be warmer.
We want 2023 again.
Well, maybe even 2023 was warmer than the historical average.
True, but
probably
it was good
wetter
production.
If we were to go back and look at the rainfall totals. But that doesn't mean you can't have a good mango season, right? But if you're asking me, what do I expect of the weather here in 2024? I expect South Florida's winter to be mild compared to the historical averages. So if you look at the historical low temperatures for December, January, and February and chart them, I'm going to predict that they will be above that historical low more nights than not. How about that? That's my prediction. Let's see if I'm right. I've been right for like 10 years.
And mango production prediction.
That is
too early.
Even more difficult to project.
All right, let's go back to our
let's
surface
hope it's
roots.
great. Let's hope that it's awesome. Let's hope it's like 2023.
Yeah.
we usually get good production here one way or another. We had actually a good season here this year,
Wait
so
a
I don't want
minute.
to
One
sound.
way or another. What does that mean?
It means that even if the winter is milder than we like or wetter than we like, we usually still end up with fruit here
Do
because
you
of
do
our
anything to
location.
induce blooming?
No.
Okay.
As far as I know, there's nothing that will induce blooming at this latitude. There are people on the internet that will tell you to spray potassium nitrate on their trees, on your trees, or calcium nitrate. It will not work at this latitude. Don't listen to them. If they tell you that it made their mango tree bloom,
You heard it
it's
here.
just incidental.
No potassium nitrate.
Yeah.
All right. So back to our surface roots. We were like the roots. We went all over the place.
Yeah, and to be clear, that does work at lower latitudes, tropical latitudes. It's at here in South Florida that it does not force the trees to bloom. Something else will force them to bloom. You were saying about the roots?
We were talking about the roots, the tap root. Where were we? We were all over the place. We talked about the tap root, and then we talked about the surface roots. You were saying, and so we were talking about watering them and keeping them moist. And so, like, I know for me, I generally, I want to withhold the water stress it till it blooms. When it does start blooming, I start adding the water back, and then I kind of look for around large marble size before I start to withdraw the water again.
That's a little too soon.
Little too soon? Okay.
That's, I would say, let them get a little bigger than that.
Golf ball?
Yeah, perhaps. So it's going to depend on the variety, too. We go by, like, a period of time.
Yeah.
Usually it's around 8 weeks. So for the fastest developing mangoes, that's going to be perhaps like 2/3 of the time period that the fruit is developing. For the ones that take a little longer, it's less than that, but typically by that point we're nearing the rainy season anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. But like, we have a lot of trees to irrigate, and if I was being more precise, then I might water some a little longer than others.
Yeah.
But I don't. So, but it makes a difference.
Well, and then
in terms of yield. So
I was going to be all over the place and start talking about the difference, maybe a different video, difference between foliar spraying and granular, and why one may be good and bad versus the other one, and what uptake do we have more through foliar methods versus granular. It might be a different video. That's good. That'd be a long one, though.
Yeah.
We'll be here a while. Where are we at? Water.
Well, the other thing about watering is that, like, so we're talking about a fruit producing mango tree, right? We will cut that off and we will stop watering them completely during the rest of the fruit development period, and that is to not, well, we want to prevent the flavor of the mango from getting disaffected by the watering, which it can if you continue to water them into maturity. And we don't want more humidity around our trees when that fruit is ripening as well, because that means more disease potentially. So we actually want the conditions around the tree at that point to be dry. And if we're adding water and moisture, we are increasing our local humidity around the tree.
So there's a very, very popular mango, and I'm not going to say what it is, that is very popular, and I'm an okay fan of it. But I thought it was exceptional this past year, and I think it was because we had the dry season come in so late, and so during all the mango development time, so it was bad fruit set because we had too much rain. But once that ended, we entered a very late dry season, and that dry season, I think, made that particular mango much more exceptional last year than that I've had in previous years.
Yeah.
Which probably a lot of mangoes were really good last year, even the ones that are
this year or last year.
2024.
Okay. So that's this year.
This year.
Right. Okay.
I say last season.
Yeah.
Last season.
Yeah, that's fine.
Season's
I'm
over.
just wanting to clarify because we went through periods each of the last 2 seasons where there was like a deluge of rain in the middle of the season.
Yeah.
And then it became dry, and it stayed dry for several weeks. And like, when that happens, you do see a big uptick in terms of the quality of the fruit, the sweetness, and all that stuff. So we saw it too, for sure, on lots of varieties.
Yeah. So anyway, well, so any other test for watering? In other words, just stomping on the soil, seeing puffs of powder come up,
Yeah, that
or
would be a good
putting your
sign.
finger in there so many
I mean,
inch.
I would certainly pay attention to
Yeah.
rainfall, and if you're receiving plenty of it, like you're getting like you know, like a couple inches a week or more, then you know, you may not need to water as much.
Or if
Um,
you have good mulching,
well, that
depending on the size of the
yeah, I
tree.
mean, like we don't mulch fruiting mango trees for different reasons,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, soil moisture matters, and if you've got mulch, your soil might be moister.
What's
Um,
interesting is the few of us down here that all do grow, we do so many of the same things, but it seems like there's that last 10% that we maybe 15 or 20, that we
mhm.
all do slightly different, because like you don't mulch, there's somebody else who
We
does
mulch young
mulch.
trees. We don't
Yeah.
mulch mature fruiting trees.
Then there's somebody else who does mulch, and depending on my tree, my younger or middle to young trees I mulch, but the old ones, I'm not putting that much mulch down because that's a big tree. But anyway, all right. Well, thank you. Any other thoughts on water? Just brief, sort of maybe parting things that we may not. Oh,
Well,
so type
another
of water, like well water. Like I have,
well, we use well water.
I use well.
Most
Yeah.
of the time, you can use city water. Sometimes you'll want to check your municipal water just to make sure it's you know, not too, I don't know, chlorotic or whatever. But in most cases, it's going to be okay. There's going to be people that tell you that like city water is no good for their plants, and so maybe in some instances that could be the case. But I have not observed any issue with it with mango. But like, you know, we use well water here, and there's no problem with it. Other than that, as far as like other things about watering, your mileage may vary a bit if you are outside of Florida. What I have been talking about in this video is irrigation practices here in South Florida. But if you are watching this video and you're in California or a
Arizona.
western state like Arizona, your watering schedule is going to be quite different from ours. And there's going to be periods of time in the year, if you water your trees, even your young trees, too frequently, you will experience root rot more frequently on your mangoes. That's a serious problem with people growing them in California, sometimes people growing them in greenhouse settings in colder states, because they're not using that water as much as they use it here in
I
South Florida, where our nighttime temperatures are significantly warmer than yours are for a big part of the year. So if you're in one of those states, beware that some of what I've been saying, like we like to water young mango trees multiple times a week here after they've been planted for the first couple of years or so. I would not necessarily advise that if you're in California or Arizona.
I know,
So,
whether right or wrong, and we could do a whole nother video on potted mangoes, and specifically watering them,
mm-hmm.
and the type of medium that you're growing it in, um, because what you get, you're buying in bulk by, I'm sure, by some large tractor trailer that comes in, versus what somebody who has one or two trees that they're going to go to Home Depot and try to buy something.
Right.
Uh, and I know sometimes, depending on the soil that my trees are in, I like to let it go a few days or longer even without water, to kind of make sure that those roots, I don't want to say completely dry out, but that I don't keep too much moisture in that pot for too long. But that's a whole nother video. We can cut and do another one.
Okay.
Anyway, all right, thank you.
No problem.